A pleasant day to everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome students, families, and faculty to this year's virtual graduation held by Alaminos City Central School. Every one of you has made an impact on the graduates who are here with us today. All of us are experiencing difficulties in our current situation brought by the pandemic, and the similarities of it we are battling in unison. Each of us has been hugely affected. Some lost lives, we lost our livelihood, and we lost the ability to travel freely and do the activities we usually do. However, we have made it through, all of us. As we congratulate our graduates this year, we should also give ourselves a big pat on the back for making this possible. Because if not for our efforts, both individually and collectively, none of this would be possible. So, without further delay, let us begin with our graduation ceremony. To formally start our program, may I request everyone viewing this virtual ceremony to rise for the doxology, followed by the Philippine National Anthem, Region 1 Hymn, Pangasinan Hymn, and Alaminos City Division Hymn.
Pambansang Awit ng Pilipinas.
Kayang mag-ibig, telas ng sinakanan, alam ng puso, sa titik mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, kuyak ka ng magiting, sa manlulupin, di ka pasisigil, sa nagatang tutok sa simoy at sa langit mong pagaw, ay hinatang tula, kawin sa pagkayang minamahal, ang isang ng matawad mo'y tagumpay na nagtitindig, ang bituin at araw niya kailan ang may di magtitindig. Luman ang araw ng walhagit pagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo. Ang inigaya ng pagkay mga api, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Mountains and the rivers, to the plains and winding trails, to the shores where breezes linger, that's the place I love so well. It's the home of men who loved her, men who died to keep us free, men who told no bad the weather, that anyone will never be. Region 1, oh Region 1, there's no better place I see. Region 1, oh Region 1, dearest home by far to me. From her care I learn my lessons, in her veils I work and play. She has kept me safe and happy as I live on day by day. Going to other lands I wander as I search for wealth and fame. In my heart I will remember Region 1, beloved name. Region 1.
Pangasinan niya binabli, daan mo taniya ligwas, liwragot ko lawas, dan puso Pangasinan, agkanalingwanan, luyak ko yan iyanagan, bedet na kanyaman.
Schools Division Superintendent, Dr. Lorna G. Bugayong, CESO 5. Our very supportive Assistant Schools Division Superintendent, Ma'am Rosario O. Cabrera. Our equally workaholic ISGAD Chief, Dr. Arturo Arbiray, and CID Chief, Dr. Orlando I. Guerrero. Our outgoing General PTA Officers 2021 and our incoming General PTA Officers for 2021-2022. Dear stakeholders, dear fellow teachers, beloved parents, and of course, our dear candidates for graduation, good morning to one and all. There were ups and downs and fears encountered as we go on with the new normal in education brought about by the pandemic that each one of us had passed through. This only shows that learning may not be easy all the time. But one thing is certain, it is rewarding. This is the reason why we are gathered today for this virtual to celebrate our triumph against all challenges to pursue continuous education. And what reward can be more meaningful as lastly to you graduating class than to receive a diploma recognizing your efforts to attain your basic education in elementary grades. Congratulations to all of you. In behalf of the 67 strong teaching and non-teaching staff of Alaminos Central School, I welcome you all this 2021 virtual graduation ceremony with the theme, Kalidad ng Edukasyon, lalong patatagin sa gitna ng pandemya. Mabuhay tayong lahat. Morning again, dear parents. I would like to give you the report on our school report card. First is enrollment. From 1,907, we increased to 1,966, wherein there is a 3% increase for our enrollment this school year 2020-2021. For our physical facilities, we have now our clinic, wherein it has already a complete medical equipment. It is divided into 3, wherein first we have the dental clinic, second the nursing clinic, and third is the medical clinic. Then, of course, you, dear parents, you have already finished your project, wherein it is called the mini multi-purpose shade. Another is, we have already a 6 classrooms, 2-story, 6 classrooms, newly constructed. Then, when we talk about our teachers, 100% attended webinars, seminars online, and they also attended INSET, ISLA, to upgrade their knowledge on teaching, especially now we are in the new normal of education. When we talk about our children, learners in school, of course, our completion rate for this year is 100%. The graduation rate is also 100%. Everybody passed this school year 2020-2021 because of your support. even though there is no face-to-face classes. For safety, of course, we were able to prevent COVID-19 pandemic here in our school. We observed safety protocol. That's why if you come to our school, we have seen that you cooperated well with us by following this safety protocol. So dear parents, I would like to ask you for your full support again for this coming school year 2021-2022. Thank you.
Good day to each and everyone who is attending virtually present at this time of our graduation ceremonies for our beloved and very precious graduates for the school year which ends at this time. First of all, I'd like to greet the parents and family members without whose sacrifices, whose reminders, and whose participation in the learning process for our graduates have resulted in this culmination program. This year, your role has changed drastically, where we've always thought, we've always believed that the matter of educating our children rests nearly exclusively on our teachers and our staff. This time, you parents, you family members, you who are in the households of our learners have expanded your role and contributed to this wonderful day, wherein finally our learners are graduating in this culmination exercise. So congratulations, because this year has not been very easy, has not been a picnic for our teachers, for our family members, as well, especially the parents, mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, and all who have contributed to the achievement of our learners at this time. So, maraming salamat at congratulations, parents and family members. Mas malaki ang role ninyo at this time compared to earlier graduation exercises. Secondly, I would also like to greet our teachers, without whose very careful review and careful supervision of the work of our pupils and our learners, this event would not be taking place at all. And so thank you, teachers. Your role has also expanded, in addition to seeing to it that the modules are faithfully followed, the assignments are correctly implemented, and the learners are truly learning. And you have had to deal with new ways of assessing the performance also of the learners. So congratulations, teachers, for enduring, for your patience, for your love for our learners, and your willingness to engage in a way and methods of teaching which are different from those which are used to. Assessment must have been especially difficult for you, especially since you were not able to see most of the time our students in face-to-face meetings, and most of the meetings, of course, were virtual. We'd also like to thank the local government units for their interest, for their cooperation, and for their continuing contributions to the needs of education, even as our children do not go to school. Your donations of material as well as financial resources at this time are most welcome, and your advice has been taken seriously not only by our teachers, by our school officials, but also by our officials in the Department of Education. We continually talk with local government units, especially in times of disaster, in times of great need for classrooms, for space, and for responses to unforeseen emergencies. Thank you, local government units. But of course, most of the congratulatory greetings fall on the deserving graduate. Each and every one of you is truly special. You are different from the other graduates who have passed through the portals of your school. You went to school practically without seeing your teachers, if at all. You went to school with your parents, your mothers, and your fathers hovering over your shoulders and seeing to it that you are able to complete your assignments. You are completing your studies at a time when examinations and assessments are different. You are culminating these long months of hard work at this time, even as you have to do family chores, even as you are distracted, and even as your world has turned upside down, and it seems and it appears as if we don't know what the future holds and what will happen next. But you have persevered, and now you are ready to graduate, and therefore you deserve each and every bit of congratulations from us in the Department of Education, from your parents and family members, your teachers, from the officials in local government, as well as in the parent teachers associations. You deserve each and every single congratulatory pat on your back, each hug, virtually of course, and each greeting which I am sure you are also receiving virtually. I don't know if you will remember this event many years from now. I have tried to recall myself who our graduation speaker was when I finished high school and when I finished my college studies. All I remember is that the graduation speaker was someone important, someone who was invited because that someone is supposed to give a message. What was more important to us graduates at that time was the excitement of the celebrations, the happiness and the joy of our parents, the sadness of parting from our classmates and from our teachers, and the enjoyment of all the graduation events that usually take place come commencement day. When I was a college student, we had a series of events which were designed to embed in our minds which were designed to help us remember and not forget our days in college. We would spend one whole day going around the campus, visiting the classrooms, saying goodbye to our teachers, and sharing memories. We would have bonfires to say goodbye to each other. We had baccalaureate services where we committed ourselves to God and we prayed for guidance when we go out into the world. So many celebrations, and the speaker, of course, is the least important and easily forgotten component of the graduation exercise. Nonetheless, I will exert all efforts to share with you what I see are things or issues which a graduate should remember and recall. I have said that you are very special. You are very different. You are pioneering. There has been no other class like your class. There has been no other graduate like you as a graduating student, because you are the very first graduate of the blended learning response to education in the Philippines. And so you ask yourself, what awaits you in the world outside? You can either work, because the kind of curriculum you survive and underwent as a student will enable you to go to work if you wish to go to work. Some of you will proceed to further studies, and this would be a wonderful thing because there are many opportunities for further expanding your knowledge, for further answering and looking for explanations of issues, events that make you curious, especially in science, in technology, and also in the arts. So you can work, you can go to further studies, and perhaps some of you will settle down, hopefully not too soon, so you can pursue what you really want to do. So today, this is why we call this exercise a commencement exercise. It's not the end of our studies. It's not the end of all our efforts with blended learning, with modules, with floods, with earthquakes, and of course with COVID. It's a commencement of doors opening to you. More doors will be open because you are a graduate. You can work, you can proceed for further studies, you can help your parents, and you can perhaps look for opportunities to do what you have always wanted to do, whether at work, whether at advanced studies, whether at learning more in science and technology, in mathematics, and in the arts. All of these opportunities are available to you. More doors are being opened. I hope you will select the door which arouses your curiosity, the door which will help you know more about this world, and the door which will allow you to contribute to the development of our country and contribute whatever we can to solve our problems and our challenges. Congratulations once more to each and every one of you. Congratulations to you, parents and family members. Congratulations to you, teachers. When I was chair of the board of Silliman University, each time we had graduation ceremonies, during the baccalaureate and during commencement itself, I would cry. I would cry because we are sending out into the world a new batch of graduates, and we want to be sure that what is awaiting them is appropriate. We want to be sure that they are ready for what awaits them when they select which door to open. And so, we tell you, go out to the world, do whatever you want to do. God be with you, and be assured that all of us love each and every one of you. Congratulations.
It is with great pleasure and admiration that I convey my best wishes and profound felicitations to all the graduates, completers, and academic awardees of the school year 2020-2021. The efforts you have exerted to accomplish your academic tasks in the difficult times are something worthy of praises. Graduation and moving up ceremonies are the much-awaited events in the life of every learner, as they represent the golden times of reaching higher education and achieving dreams and aspirations. Definitely, the road you have taken is rough, but all the struggles are worth considering, as they are the first few steps that will define your future success. Indeed, finishing this challenging school year during these trying times of COVID-19 pandemic is remarkable, since it has been inevitable to face and accept the new normal landscape of education. It has been a school year of extraordinary hard work, dedication, and passion for all school leaders, teachers, learners, and parents in dealing and coping with chosen learning delivery modality to meet the most essential educational requirements. While it is admittedly difficult, you may take it positively, as you have been given the opportunity to adapt to difficulties that have strengthened your innate potentials. Likewise, the incessant motivation and support of parents towards the seemingly thorny road to success caused by the global health crisis, as well as the strict obedience to various health and safety protocols, have enormously pitched in to this moment of your graduation and completion. My dear graduates, completers, and awardees, you have just marked another significant milestone in your continued quest for excellence and successful future. Certainly, more challenges will still come your way. However, to hurdle this, you should stay focused and always remember that your dreams are within reach when you are determined and committed to realize them. My beloved parents, community officials, and other stakeholders, accept our heartfelt gratitude for the victory we have achieved today. Thank you for being an effective and efficient partners of the Department of Education in the implementation of distance learning. Your untiring support is a deeper reflection of the unconditional love you have bestowed to the learners through the years. Undoubtedly, you have greatly taken part in realizing the goals and objectives of DepEd's pivot to quality education under the Sulong Edukalidad program. Our sincere commendations to all our DepEd officials, the school administrators, faculty members, and non-teaching staff for providing the highest degree of service para sa bata, para sa bayan. Finally, With this happy celebration of your graduation and completion, it is with confidence to say that you have given our theme for this year, strengthening the quality of education amid the COVID-19 pandemic, a very special meaning. Congratulations and have a wonderful graduation day and moving up ceremonies.
Hats off to you, our dear members of Class 2021, for making it through the challenges of education in the new normal. My warmest congratulations to all parents, guardians, and teachers for sharing the journey with our graduates. While the COVID-19 health pandemic has brought abrupt and overwhelming changes into the lives of many, it is remarkable that you have gone this far. And while many have doubts and fears about making education happen, amid the global health crisis, we all celebrate with you today your dedication, hard work, and resiliency in completing your elementary education. Your diploma is a testament of the hard labor you have put into just to reach this far. In you, our mission to make education continue is realized. We were witnesses to how you struggled hard to achieve your goals. And though it was a difficult trail, your determination to outdo yourselves and exceed your limitations helped you pull through the toughest days, weeks, and months of distance learning. Today is your time to harness the fruit of your toil, and you deserve a salute from all of us. Your graduation, through the laborious work you have endured with your parents, guardians, and teachers, made this year's graduation theme, Kalidad ng Edukasyon, lalong patatagin sa gitna ng pandemya, come into fruition as you have remarkably survived a school year like no other, a school year of many things and of many new educational breakthroughs. Your SDO Alaminos City wishes you all the best as you embark into a new stage of your lives in high school. Go forth, our dear graduates, and bloom where you are planted.
To our beloved Principal 2 of Alaminos Central School, Ma'am Shirley P. Inerva, I have the honor to present to you 141 boys and 173 girls, with a total of 314 candidates for graduation, who satisfactorily completed all the requirements prescribed by the Bureau of Elementary Education of the Department of Education. And I hereby petition for their graduation this 15th day of July, 2021.
Virtue vested on me by the Department of Education, Region 1, Alaminos City Division, I hereby accept and confirm your petition for graduation this 15th day of July 2021. Congratulations! You are now to receive your certificates for graduation.
Grade 6 Gifted and Talented Advisor, Mrs. Marilu R. Tugade. Caleb Latrell Kit S. with High Honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Carmelo C. Caleb. Servas Kurt Demian N. with High Honors. Parents, Mr. Alejo S. Servas Jr., Miss Rhea D. Navarro. De la Cruz Zid Ethan C. with Honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Emmanuel C. de la Cruz. Farnacio Crisanto Jr. E. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Crisanto C. Farnacio Sr. Jimenez Kyle Jeffrey P. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jefferson T. Jimenez. Madamba Hiro Arnel T. with high honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jerry D. Madamba. Maunga Alimon Jr. B. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Alimon B. Maunga Sr. Quebral Eunice Klein with honors. Parent, Mrs. Kimi Saiza C. Quebral. Rabanera John Nathan P. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Dennis S. Rabanera. Reyate Yuhil Rain S. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Angelito R. Reyate. Salcedo Jeff Matthew O. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jeffrey R. Salcedo. Wu George Jr. R. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. George B. Wu. Antonio Lady Alea T. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Arthur Adam A. Antonio. Aquino Akisha Rain M. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas James A. Aquino. Assis Hershey Rain M. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Agostito R. Assis. Bonzo Mary Antoinette W. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Antonio F. Bonzo Sr. Kamba Michelle Vivian R. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Manuel C. Kamba. Kamba Precious Joy N. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Bernardino D. Kamba. Caperal Ramsel Jane E. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jamar V. Caperal. Datu Jamalea Haji A. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Linog C. Datu. Dolor Jenny Ann S. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Norberto D. Dolor Jr. Domondon Princess Ira B. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Randy B. Domondon. Endrano Kisha Lay E. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Kara Irvin R. Endrano. Fontanilla Maria Catalina M. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Melesio C. Fontanilla. Ganaban Levy R. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Meliton B. Ganaban. Garcia Jem Amanda A. with high honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Joe Andrew B. Garcia. Mansilungan Maybell A. with high honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Antonio B. Mansilungan. Mendez Zyrene Harp R. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Bernard G. Mendez. Ogena Princess Shamira R. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Noreto M. Ogena. Polmano Maria Amorfina I. with honors. Parents, Attorney and Judge Reben B. Polmano. Rabanera Luisa Brianna R. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Wilbert A. Rabanera. Rabina Kisha with honors. Parent, Mrs. Ladybeth G. Rabina. Rakuya Rodalie M. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Rodrigo A. Rakuya. Tolentino Warlin A. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Warlo C. Tolentino. Viray Samantha Denise R. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Francisco III M. Viray. Grade 6, Section 1 Advisor, Mrs. Maricel D. Valenzuela. Adona Savion John F. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. John Venrex and Adona. Ancheta Lawrence Gabi A. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Gabi D. Ancheta. Barcelona Jericho J. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Richard R. Barcelona Sr. Bugay Carl Andre M. Parent, Miss Carmela C. Montenegro. Karasi Calvin B. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Carlos B. Karasi. Cordero Matthew Cadmiel B. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Eleazar D. Cordero. Dichoso Carabin Benedict C. with honors. Parents, Miss Bethlen C. Dichoso. Flores Nomer J.C. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Noel C. Flores. Garcia Bryce Juno E. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Benjamin F. Garcia. Marcus John Luis A. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Roland P. Marcus. Paglutin Mark Allen P. Parent, Miss Marilu R. Pecora. Santos Lestat Chris D. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Richard P. Santos. Velasco Ken Ivan B. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Rudy M. Velasco. Abara Jasmine B. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Benjamin R. Abara Jr. Acuna Valerie Kate B. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jefferson Acuna. Baldove Angeline L. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jezer P. Baldove. Barroso Audrey Hilary R. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Raymart T. Barroso. Benavente Erin Grace S. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Eric P. Benavente. Bruno Jewel Kellen T. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Nolly A. Bruno. Carino Arabella E. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jessie Jesus R. Carino. Kapahan Jerish R. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ezekiel R. Kapahan. Cruz Princess Hannah D. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Herbert O. Cruz. Damasco Marian Rose P. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Eduardo C. Damasco Jr. De Ramos Lorraine O. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Aldrin D. De Ramos. De La Cruz Emerose A. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Abraham R. De La Cruz Jr. De La Cruz Francis Carl D. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Nordel C. De La Cruz. De La Paz Francine Lyra D. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Francis M. De La Paz. De Fontorum Ida Marie N. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Benji O. De Fontorum. Dulatre Elizabeth Ann C. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Godofredo G. Dulatre. Gabayan Elaine Margaret M. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Benedict G. Gabayan. Garcia Carmelin May P. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Benjamin F. Garcia. Garcia Rain Ina G. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Junard B. Garcia. Gomez Bianca Rain D. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Bendix A. Gomez. Humilde Jane Pauline with honors. Parent, Miss Rodora Celia R. Humilde. Luna Justine Roan P. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. J.R. M. Luna. Mamanta Rihanna D. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Gerald J. Mamanta. Mandak Sofia Ingrid F. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Edwin M. Mandak. Nato Freya Lee N. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Franco J. Nato. Ordanza Alexandra Jade R. Parent, Miss Maricruz R. Ordanza. Pagador Ariane May C. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Arnold D. Pagador. Pansoy Lorian Estrella Joy with honors. Parent, Miss Librada F. Pansoy. Kitanya Azaraya Arnett R. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Arnelo A. Kitanya. Rabanera Angel Sweet V. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Vandervelt G. Rabanera. Rahel Aquila Margaret O. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Dominador A. Rahel Jr. Razote Christine Joy D. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Marvin A. Panaga. Reynoso Micaela P. Parent, Miss Michelle P. Reynoso. Remigio Princess May A. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Erwin B. Remigio. Tumaruntong Ruhaina V. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Rockman P. Tumaruntong. Uson Shayesha Dominic D. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Salvador A. Uson Jr. Velasco Princess Claire B. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Alan A. Velasco. U. Jessa Rose P. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ferdinand D. U. Section 2 Advisor, Mrs. Leigh Catherine N. Abarquez. Albandia Abraham R. With honors, parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ernesto U. Albandia. Aquino Rayo James M. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas James A. Aquino. Balao Prince Avis B. Parent, Miss Aliana L. Bembo. Bensine Nathan F. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Reggie R. Bensine. Bulatao Kevin C. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Freddie A. Bulatao. Katabay James Bob C. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ariel C. Katabay. De Silva Jais Mark T. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. John Mark M. De Silva. Idoldol Adrian James A. Parent, Miss Gina A. Idoldol. Garcia DeAndre D. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ryan G. Garcia. Gomez Jumel E. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Joey P. Gomez. Gutierrez Dandy Jr. R. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Dandy D. Gutierrez Sr. Halog Lloyd Jimbo R. With honors, parents, Mr. and Mrs. Lloyd F. Halog. Miranda Evan Zedekiah O. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Mark Miranda. Natividad Andrew James O. Parents, Mr. Patrocinio C. Rebualos. Mrs. Mary Rose II O. Natividad. Navarro Niljan D. With honors, parents, Mr. and Mrs. Noel M. Navarro. Talie Mark Vincent G. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Samuel E. Palya. Prado Rich Bien M. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Crispino C. Prado Jr. Ramirez Louis J. R. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jerry B. Ramirez. Rasho Arthur Kai Edison V. R. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. King Arthur II E. Rasho. Regaspi Mac Hyper M. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Barbaro V. Regaspi. Rowando Cherub O. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Wilfredo M. Ruando. Saripado Farhan G. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Hasanor D. Saripado. Sarmiento John Mati P. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Egmedio Jr. R. Sarmiento. Tugade Crizel Clay Chad V. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ricardo B. Tugade. Idio Kyle Vincent R. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Salvador Jr. S. Idio. Asto Granny M. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Gregorio Jr. R. Asto. Balidoy Angelica Faith C. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Alan C. Balidoy. Bantola Roname B. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ronnie R. Bantola. Barilia Edeline Nicole D. Parent, Miss Lina D. Barilia. Kabatik Jayan Camille S. With honors, parents, Mr. and Mrs. J. Kabatik. Carranza Mary Joyce B. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Henoleo B. Carranza. Corpus Fabian. With honors, parents, Miss Primitiva C. Corpus. Dacones Beverlyn B. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Wilbert M. Dacones. Decano Shena Moraine R. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Manuel S. Decano. Estrada Trixie R. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Rex P. Estrada. Fernandez Jillian Clarice F. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Joselito E. Fernandez. Gaming Kija Julia Athena C. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Julius R. Gaming. Gomez Azanet Shane G. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ediboy D. Gomez. Japones Maria Juraika R. With honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Clemente Jr. R. Japones. Malikdam Altea Gabriel C. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ronaldo Malikdam. Manahan Altea Marie D. With honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Eduardo Manahan. Marzan Kaylin Ashley. With honors. Parents, Miss Glende S. Marzan. Mendez Lindsay Erica Q. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Erwin N. Mendez. Onya Antoinette S. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Antonio Sr. G. Onya. Onya Julieta Lee B. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jovito R. Onya. Orbos Sofia Lorraine L. Parents, Mr. Jerome R. Orbos, Mrs. Charlene Grace L. Balano. Ortaleza Marian P. With honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Marvin O. Ortaleza. Porganan Sofia Brianna G. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Marlon R. Porganan. Rabanal Adriana Mayer T. With honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ryan E. Rabanal. Rakutan Ericel Blaine D. With honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. John Erickson A. Rakutan. Tiangson Melody A. With honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Nilo R. Tiangson. Victor Thea Claudette D. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Primo De Victor. Grade 6, Section 3 Advisor, Mrs. Nikki J. Valenzuela. Ancheta Artwin Prince F. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Arturo S. Ancheta. Banikad Bruce Martin E. Parents, Mr. John Marlin Williamson and Miss Yolanda E. Banikad. Bowling Josh Lucky N. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jonathan and Bowling. Caberto John Carlos C. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Orlando O. Caberto. Camba Oder III B. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Oder Camba Jr. Cortez Ulysses Angelo T. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Reynaldo R. Cortez Jr. Kudal Ervin J. B. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Erwin B. Kudal. Dawat Jerick Russell G. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jerry Dawat. De la Cruz John Michael R. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Edgardo M. De La Cruz. De la Cruz Rome Lecar M. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Romeo de la Cruz. Escaño Arthur James C. With honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Samuel O. Escaño. Garcia Stephen B. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Eden T. Garcia. Gomez Mark Ivan D. Parent, Miss Shabeli D. Gomez. Julio Shanli T. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Sonny N. Julio. La Peña Riley Kendricks B. With honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Edward A. La Peña. Razote Renato Jr. Q. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Renato D. Razote Sr. San Antonio Shady Raid G. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Resty R. San Antonio. Torcato Van Hansen R. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Roger R. Torcato. Alvarez Angelica Charm R. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Fernando T. Alvarez. Angan-Angan Lori Jane Q. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Isagani S. Angan-Angan. Arcelia Diana Lingel J. Guardian, Miss Rafaela Imbot. Boton Annalyn P. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Alvin Boton. Karasi Marian Joy Q. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Marcelo Karasi. Cortez Princess Violet R. Parents, Mr. Janavel P. Cortez and Miss Bernadette Rangel. De Vera Alaika Nicole Jean T. Parents, Mr. Rodelito S. De Vera and Miss Maria Florin C. Tumakag. Del Rosario Justin Rain C. Parent, Miss Erminda C. Del Rosario. De la Cruz Jasmine C. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Joseph De La Cruz. Dichoso Sydney Lorraine Ash S. With honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jameson C. Dichoso. De Masar Fatma M. Parent, Miss Norhana L. De Masar. Domado Jalia L. Parent, Mrs. Norhana L. Domado. Domingo Lori May V. Parent, Miss Lorma G. Vivas. Legisma L.J. G. Guardian, Miss Elania G. Legisma. Lopez Princess Roselle C. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Robert R. Lopez. Marin Sheila May D. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Artem V. Marin. Miranda Magel Calix B. Parent, Miss Marilyn C. Bacala. Nantin Flor C. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ronnie M. Nantin, Sr. Panumpang Janina O. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Alinador J. Panumpang. Patikawan Charis A. Parents, Mr. Akes Marcos O. Patikawan and Miss Devora A. Patikawan. Reyes Pauline Ann M. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Sonny R. Reyes. Reynaldo Maria Angela D. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Julius T. Reynaldo. Romero Denise N. Parent, Miss Elsa Romero. Sarmiento Ella Cristal Joy Y. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Elenito T. Sarmiento. Soriano Jesiah May H. Parent, Mr. Arlie Soriano. Velonza Apple Jen H. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ray A. Velonza.
Grade 6, Section 4 Advisor, Miss Jester Marie M. Ordanza. Abara Ron Mar Jan P. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ruben Abara Sr. Balsacao Francis Leomar R. Parent, Mrs. Mary Chris R. Balsacao. Bautista Christian R. Parents, Mr. Jose Bautista Jr. and Mrs. Crisel Bautista. Bautista Tyler Dylan R. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Rene Bautista. Beltran June M. Parent, Miss Evhen B. Tan. Campos Resti Jr. C. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Reste Campos Sr. Canlas Junray M. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Eduardo L. Canlas Jr. Castro Jason N. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Johnny Castro. Cruz John Raven D. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Antonio Cruz Jr. Pucal Ren Eman P. Parent, Mrs. Elisa Pucal. Friza Zion N. Parents, Mr. Ramon Tindeke and Miss Daisy Nocasa. Gatmen Jared Shant D. Parents, Mr. Oscar C. Gatmen and Mrs. Janet D. Gatmen. Gomez Frederick P. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Glenn Gomez. Marsan Jairus G. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jeffrey S. Marsan. Molina Francis Owen M. Parents, Mr. Roberto Molina Jr. and Mrs. Karen Molina. Onya Peter Paul Marlowe F. Parents, Mr. Michael Onya. Peralta Johan Efrael O. Parent, Mr. and Mrs. Efren B. Peralta. Queredo Christian Dave C. Parent, Mrs. Rowena C. Queredo. Ranyaga John Rexter F. Parents, Mr. Reggie V. Ranyaga and Miss Marites Flores. Reyes Hector F. Parents, Mr. Johnny B. Reyes and Mrs. Rowena F. Reyes. Reyes Mark Anthony H. Parents, Mr. Marcelino B. Reyes and Miss Cheryl C. Hernandez. Sullivan Acer N. Parents, Mr. Reynan Sullivan and Miss Marilu Nivida. Tugade Jason T. Parent, Mrs. Veronica Tugade. Anjeta Edita B. Parents, Mrs. Isabel B. Anjeta. Apolinar Princess Gina May R. Parent, Mrs. Josephine Kilia. Asto Robian Lay C. Parent, Miss Jessie Alja. Banto Janessa B. Parent, Mr. Abdul Jabbar C. Banto. Beltran Lisa M. Parent, Miss Evhen B. Tan. De la Cruz Cristel Ann J. Parent, Miss Adelina De La Cruz. Gomez Princess Michelle R. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Julius Gomez. Ignacio Ana Leia R. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Freddy R. Ignacio. Mejia Katrina May. Parents, Mr. Lawrence D. Ocampo and Miss Judy Mejia. Muhammar Siti Mariam E. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Muhammar D. Naung. Montemayor Gisrel R. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jones Montemayor. Morata Jasmine N. Parent, Mrs. Jacqueline M. Morata. Onya Jaisel J. B. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jerry B. and Onya. Poldo Judy Ann C. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Orlando N. Poldo Jr. Rausa Kimchi Tin A. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Mark Ariel Rausa. Rigaspi Angelita C. Parent, Miss Mary Grace S. Serna. Reyes Princess Joy F. Parents, Mr. Johnny B. Reyes and Mrs. Rowena F. Reyes. Romero Reina Ashley D. Parent, Miss Bernadette P. De La Cruz. Salvador Angel L. Parent, Mrs. Loela Lumano. Season Alexia Philin B. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Charlene May B. Season. Victorio Jana Rose E. Parents, Mr. John Victorio and Mrs. Christine in grade 6, Section 5. Advisor, Mr. Geoffrey Boy R. Celeste. Abdul Majid Yasin. Parents, Mrs. Mariam Jamil. Abibwag Michael B. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Roger P. Abibwag. Vidanya Renz B. Parents, Mr. Jonard R. Vidanya and Mrs. Maria Teresa C. Verona. Bumakod Michael G. U.S. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Cheryl S. Bumakod. Livera Jr. Jobart W. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jobart A. De Vera Sr. Dumado Jalal L. Parent, Norhaina L. Dumado. Macalino Giancarlo R. Parent, Mrs. Jennifer Rindon. Mendiguarin Ryan Paulo R. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Roberto Mendiguarin. Montemayor Justin R. Parents, Mr. Ronald Montemayor and Mrs. Rosalyn Rabi. Opage J. Jomar O. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Marjorie Opage. Padilla Aldrin M. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Francis O. Padilla. Perez John Paul J. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Wendell B. Perez. Rabaya Rain A. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Irene Rabaya. Ranyopa John David G. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Dante O. Ranyopa. Rausa Jewel A. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Mark Ariel Rausa. Riot Diamond Carl A. Parent, Mr. Reginald O. Riot. Rial Jericho C. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Efrasto Rial. Riate Kobe Brian R. Parents, Mr. Anacleto R. Riate. Rindon Rainier R. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Redendo C. Rindon. Rindon Sherwin Ron H. Parents, Mr. Roydan Gulapugane and Mrs. Loida Humilde. Ruiz Marion M. Parents, Mr. Mario Ruiz. Sublichero Lucky R. Parents, Mr. Jeffrey Q. Sublichero and Mrs. Sheila R. Sublichero. Soriano John Denver C. Parents, Mrs. Angelica Kamba. Tuason John Abraham M. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Abraham Tuason Sr. Valdez Adrian Kyle A. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Risa Leia A. Valdez. Abara Cherry Santa G. Parents, Mrs. Regina Galla. Balagat Christine Joy C. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Bernadette Balagat. Bergonia Jillian Michelle C. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Julius Cesar B. Bergonia. Conarco Maria Fatima N. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Leo Conarco. David Angela Eunice P. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Edwin David. Duminden Carlinda May R. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Corleto M. Duminden. Galio Angelina S. Parent, Mr. Ray Gallo. Garguenia Ivy Claire A. with honors. Parents, Mrs. Melanie A. Garguenia. Honrada Christine May V. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Robert B. Honrada. Montibon Joy R. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Isaac S. Magat. Padulina Nicole B. Parents, Mrs. Jovelyn Vidania. Kila Angela Faith B. Parent, Mrs. Minta Balsaca. Ravara Shane R. Cardiac, Mr. Crisanto Ontalasco and Mrs. Emily Ontalasco. Rabi Sheila D. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ray Rabi. Regidor Jasmine D. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Leonino C. Rindon. Rindon Leia Ann J. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Concepcion J. Rindon. Rosario Hilary Joy H. Parents, Mrs. Jocelyn Hernandez. Season, Mary Ann S. Parent, Ariston D. Season. Tabanera Ashley. Parent, Mrs. Rochelle R. Tabanera. Grade 6, Section 6 Advisor, Mr. Carmelo D. Paduyos. Acosta John Maverick L. with honors. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jimmy C. Acosta. Adoka Barak A. with honors. Parent, Mrs. Christy M. Acaso. Alonso Meljan M. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Marcelino Alonso Jr. Balanico Rain M. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ronaldo D. Balanico. Barcelona Ashley R. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Lauro R. Barcelona. Bautista John Del R. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Anthony G. Bautista. Cruz Jared Bieber G. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ranel P. Cruz. Daragay Jomar C. Parent, Mrs. Jocelyn C. Daragay. Flores Mark Anthony Q. Parent, Mrs. Mila Kilia. Gara George D. Parent, Mr. Dario R. Arvezo and Mrs. Linda D. Gara. Gregory Ashton A. Parents, Mrs. Leticia A. Gregory. Lumboy Mark John C. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Elias N. Lumboy. Mercado Shasti Hiver D. Parent, Mrs. Beverly D. Ocampo. Onya Romeo Jr. G. Parents, Mrs. Jeneline G. Onya. Orias Donald Jr. L. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Donald Orias Sr. Pautak Omir D. Parents, Mr. Amron M. Pautak. Kuniques Kurt Axel C. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Giancarlo Ben. Rabanera Luis Rafael E. Parents, Mr. Eduardo Rabanera and Mrs. Mia Rabanera. Ranin Mark Joseph A. Parents, Mrs. Lenny A. Ranin. Rantayo Rafael D. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Rankelino Rantayo Jr. Reynaldo Mark Daryl Q. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Darius D. Reynaldo. Say Allen John Arthur Elsley C. Parents, Mrs. Annalyn Katabay. Season Jomel D. Parent, Mrs. Amelia D. Season. Taloma Nathan J. P. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Rodolfo P. Taloma Jr. Ventura Kyle Cyrus S. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Elmer C. Ventura. Abuliso Maria Jenica C. Parents, Mr. Romeo B. Abuliso and Mrs. Jeneline Abuliso. Alcantara Ashley May. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jeremias R. Alcantara. Bautista Jaisel Joyce F. Parents, Mr. Jimmy C. Bautista and Mrs. Terry Ruth R. Pontanilla. Bembo Rian Angel U. Parent, Mr. Ronnie Boy Bembo. Bingsod, Trixie Nicole J. Parents, Miss Novaline A. Jimenez. Calisar, Mary Rose N. Parents, Mrs. Rowena D. Nisperos. Kasipit, Princess Laika C. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Aubrey F. Kasipit. Culiado, Katrina F. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Anthony D. Culiado. Perer, Janine Shaira B. Parents, Mrs. Paterna C. Villarreal. Francisco Cristina Lynn D. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Renato Francisco Jr. Francisco Jessica N. Parent, Mrs. Jocelyn P. Noma. Gabito Stephanie C. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jonathan B. Gabito. Makinyana Maria Antoinette M. Parents, Mrs. Anjanette M. Makinyana. Onya Lawrence Jane B. Parents, Mrs. Maricel V. Onya. Putension Merlinda N. Parents, Mrs. Grace N. Putension. Rabina Angelica E. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Joseph C. Rabina. Rapay-Rapay Princess Angel B. Parent, Mr. and Mrs. Jude G. Rapay-Rapay. Raquinho Pauline F. Parents, Mr. and Mrs. Paul G. Raquinho. Tanda Joanne P. Parents, Mrs. Leonida P. Tanda.
Share a glance and greet and know each other. And now our time is up. Each one is packing up. We find another chance to meet again together and feel each other's heart. I feel like breaking up. It's this time that almost always makes me cry. Before we say goodbye, I wanna let you know I love you. Thank you for playing my music. Thank you for singing my song. Thank you for sparing a moment. 'Cause with you I feel I really belong. Thank you for keeping me company. Thank you for being my friend. And if our paths should cross somewhere, I'd like to sing this song again. flame before the day is done, before the night is gone, before the curtain closes. Let me thank you for playing my music. Thank you for singing my song. Thank you for sparing a moment, 'cause with you I feel I really belong. Thank you for keeping me company. Thank you for being my friend. And if I pass you cross somewhere, I'd like to sing this song again. Thank you for playing my music. Thank you for singing my song. Thank you for sparing a moment, 'cause with you I feel I really belong. Thank you for keeping me company. Thank you for being my friend.
Of Alaminos Central School personnel, I would like to start by expressing my most profound gratitude for the opportunity to provide a few remarks to our graduates. Graduates of class 2021, congratulations! You have worked amid this pandemic. You really deserve to be proud of this achievement. But your success is not just the product of individual effort, rather the result of collective commitment of many people. The awards you receive will not be possible without the support of parents and families. Let us thank them all the way, encouraging you to pursue your education. Their sacrifices in coming to school to pick up and return the completed learning goals and activities. Next, give salute to your teachers. When this year, we imagine how they will teach you so that you will be encouraged, inspired, and challenge you to do your best work. They have the passion and hard work, especially now that we are facing different learning modalities. Your classmates and friends who make wonderful fruits and memories along your stay in our school, now your alma mater, the distinguished Alaminos Central School. The place where knowledge, wisdom, and right attitude were gained. Finally, our Lord God, who never abandoned us even this crucial time. My dear graduates, do not think that learning will stop here. Another door awaits you, that is your secondary education. Continue your race, your journey towards education. The challenges, difficulties, and troubles will come along the way. Remember that dedication, hard work, and strong faith will make your new life brighter. Again, we are proud of you and more proud of what you will achieve. Once again, good day and congratulations.